Good afternoon, and thank you for tuning in to Proud Parent, sponsored by Berry Global. I'm Stephanie Terry, Executive Director at the Children's Museum of Evansville, where we bring families together to play and learn. Proud Parent is a speaker series that aims to provide information and resources for parents to better support our growing community's children. Raising children is a difficult task for which no one is ever completely prepared. We've all heard the African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. In my opinion, the village has never been more important and necessary than it is today. Today's children are faced with a multitude of both challenges and opportunities. And this pandemic has heightened many of the challenges our children face. Growing up, the people in my village, they fed me. They allowed me to stay overnight in their homes. They watched me as I played in the streets, and they even disciplined me. This African proverb tells us that everyone is responsible for the well being and growth of our community. In order for children to grow up in a healthy environment, the entire community has to work together in partnership with parents. We have some great panelists here today that will help us dive into this very important topic. Dr. Joy Howard is an assistant professor in the teacher education department at the University of Southern Indiana. She is the mother of three boys, a former teacher, and an active in our Evansville community. Her scholarship focuses primarily on issues of race and racism in education. She is interested in finding ways to partner with the community and to create equitable practices, policies, and programs for students experiencing an opportunity gap in schools. Her better half is Travis. With over 20 years in education, Dr. Howard is currently serving as principal of Dexter Elementary School in Evansville. He has a passion for encouraging others and building relationships that are built on trust, mutual respect, and shared leadership. And finally, we have with us Danielle Granger. Danyelle is a Senior Vice President, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for Old National Bank. In this role, she partners with Old National's executive leaders to embed inclusion and equity into strategies that focus on areas of talent, culture, marketplace, and community. Danielle serves on many community boards, including Habitat for Humanity, Girl Scouts of Southwest Indiana, and the YWC Evansville. She also is an officer and an active member of Zeta Zeta Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. But most importantly, she is the proud mother of Jameer and Jemiah. So let's jump right into this conversation. Our first question for our panelists is how can parents ensure their children are on track? And what does your village look like for your children? Danielle?
Thank you. I really like the name of this series, Proud Parent. I'm definitely a proud parent, not a perfect parent with perfect children, but definitely a proud parent. Like most parents, every day I just really try to ensure that my children know that they are loved and that they love themselves. One thing I always try to encourage is that they take risk and not be afraid of the outcomes that they're not pleased with, which is really hard because they're both competitive and stubborn. But we practice a lot of grace in our household. As a parent, experiences and exposure are extremely important to me. I have a saying that you can't leave beyond your exposure. So we practice that a lot, whether it's through traveling, reading, or pushing ourselves to do uncomfortable things. They also know that academics come first, but that doesn't mean straight A's are the only measure. I just want them to know that if they tried their best, gave it their all, and I really want them to have the tools that they need to do so. And so whether that means getting them support through tutoring or other methods, that's what I'll do. When I think about my village, it's not just who is providing financially, but also when they're in a school play, a sporting activity, an activity at church, who do they look out into the crowd and see is there? And so for them, it's grandparents, great grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and also a large group of friends.
There's so much to say about this question, and I some of my comments are just really to, stay focused on the whole child, right? So academics definitely are supported also, and only possible when our children are well in terms of emotionally, mentally, and physically too, right? The nutrition that they're getting, the exercise they're getting. So really holistically, we know that as parents, but I think, just hearing it maybe from educators as well, of that it all flows into their academic success. And I like what Danielle said in terms of like the measures of success aren't always just the grade at the end of the report card, right? And so, I would say trusting your gut as a parent of these things, that maybe this doesn't feel quite right, or I don't know how this is going to end up. But also, and I love too what you said, Danielle, about encouraging our children to take risks. But also part of that is us taking risks and modeling that behavior too, of I'm going to do new and scary things, and that they are absolutely observing and seeing us walk that out. To give you one example, and sort of as an answer to your question, our boys have started their own business. They have a jewelry company. They've been making bracelets and earrings, and it all started with they started a little store in one of my youngest son's bedroom when he was 7. And we're like, and they called it the Awesome Store. And so we're like, let's really tap into that and let's make this a thing. And it's been this big risk sort of that we've taken as a family. I didn't know anything about business, but we've been learning it together. And that's been really important. And so I would add, like, identify your children's passions and go with it, because they're coming to you with a lot of questions, but they're also coming to you with a lot of answers too, that we have to attend to and find ways to support and get excited about what they're excited about. So that would be my answer.
And I'll just kind of piggyback off what Joy said in terms of the village piece. I'll kind of talk about that a little bit. I think you just have to be strategic, and your gut has to lead you to those people that can be a part of your village. And it's a mutual thing. So you're looking for who the kids are responding to, and then who's responding to your kids, and then making sure that, there is that, again, that piece inside your spirit that says this person is good for my child to be around and to have a relationship with. And so a part of that village piece, though, is also affirming those people when they do step up. And so I did that recently with one of Jonas's coaches. He played basketball, organized in a middle school for the first time. And his coach really did an excellent job of building his confidence and affirming him. And so just yesterday, Tuesday, I walked up, I talked to him and said, man, I thank you for doing that for my child and for giving him the confidence to be a better basketball player and better person. And it just was great to see his reaction. Yeah. So that's kind of that village piece that I think we need to constantly affirm and encourage those people who are doing that in the lives of our kids.
Absolutely. That's excellent. Actually, that's so inspiring to hear you say that, Travis. It makes me help honestly reflect on some things that, I could do differently too with my son and those relationships and those people that he's connecting to. And again, affirming those relationships, because I think that's important that people understand and know that. As we kind of continue this conversation, let's talk a little bit more about what we see in the community, specifically Evansville, of course, but even some of your work before relocating here to the city. We know that there are a lot of great programs out there in the community that are supporting kids. But in your experience, what are some examples of good collaborations that have resulted in improved student outcomes? Dr. Howard?
Okay, I'll take that on and look to both of you to add to this. Certainly, I would say Carver Community Center is a champion of our community in terms of different ways that they step up for our children and the educational programming and connections with families and children. At USI, we have a science extension program. They're doing a science fair coming up and really sort of integrating into encouraging that science education, science and engineering, which is so important, in this day and age. I would say EVPL, Evansville Public Library, has a lot of great resources. I really think highly of our public library and doing that work outside of the formal school space, but absolutely an educational space, with offering diverse books, but also programming, right? And tapping into that igniting student interest or youth interest, right? That might not show up in the formal classroom, but are 100% something that might spark an interest that children go with for the rest of their lives. And for the young ones, I know that there's like a bilingual read aloud and some virtual options for librarians who are reading picture books that are accessible in multiple languages. And that virtual, we've had to be real creative. So I would encourage parents definitely to tap into that as a resource for, because I know it's hard with, getting our hands on really anything when we're so hands off in these virtual spaces, but that's there and really powerful. And of course, the Children's Museum of Evansville, certainly a shout out to everything that you all are doing with the young people in our community and for families, as well as the YMCA. I think that body piece, and the sporting activities and things like that is really important for sure as well. So those would be some of, but not an extensive list of, mind, body, spirit, the village that is really speaking to those different areas and supporting our children to grow well.
Absolutely.
And as I think about the community, I'm currently getting my doctoral degree in community-based leadership. Okay. And so in looking at it from a school lens, I am trying to now think about ways to actively engage parents, students, and community leaders to help with the development and organization of my school space, mm-hmm. to ensure that we have equity, to ensure that our kids are on track academically and socially, behaviorally, and emotionally. Oftentimes, we only hear those voices when there are issues or when there's problems or when you're trying, but oftentimes we sometimes don't include those voices when you're trying to put a plan in place to really transform a school setting. And so that's really what I am in the process of not only learning about, but doing some small steps on how to begin that work, because it's going to take everyone to kind of collaborate and have those, I'll say just those discussions first around equity and around the caring gap, or most people know it by the achievement gap. But we have to have the community involved to have those discussions together. So then we can maybe have some solutions together as well.
Absolutely. Now, I guess in terms of and how are the children Evansville? Is that kind of the basis or the foundation for the work that you're doing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that came out of, just to give you a little history, that came out of some question from the social status of African American males, commissioned a report about the school to prison pipeline. And so real brief history here, that was in the fall of 2018 that report was completed from a colleague of mine, Dr. Timberly Baker. And she does the number crunching, right? So we knew sort of the story that the numbers were telling us. And there was a community forum where all the leaders from across the community, many of whom, I mentioned on my list and, who are well-known folks in their community doing great things, heard this report. And basically the question that was a resounding question in the audience which were community leaders, was what's next? What do we do? You know, if we know there's a problem, then what are we collectively doing about it? And so that's where I kind of was like, well, you know, I do community-based research, and how can we, you know, sort of get together, and not one of us has the solution, but we collectively, we as a village, right, which is the the topic here, we've got something. We have something that can create positive change for our children. And so from that, formulated the some focus groups where we talk to families of specifically Black and multiracial children who go to school in this community, and said, you know, what are the problems, but also what are our ideas for solutions? And from that came what we're calling a network. So it's not its own organization, but really the purpose serving to ask, and how are the children? From the Maasai warriors, you ask each other, and how are the children, as opposed to saying, how are you, right? Or hello, it's, and how are the children? And the hope is that the children are well, will be the response, because if the children are well, then we are all well. But if the children are not well, we are not well. And so we know from those reports, the children are not well. But the hope is, the belief is, we're working towards creating a community where the children can be well. And we can do that as a village. We cannot do that on our separate islands, right? And so the function of the network is to bring folks together to say, okay, you got this area, and you're going to do this from a school perspective in an excellent way. And this, you know, Carver's got this, and the library's got this, and, you know, we can all come together to show up for our children in big ways and small ways, right? To really support a brighter future. So that's what, and how are the children? That's kind of the notion behind it.
And we know, I mean, when we collaborate in that way, you're going to get better outcomes. I mean, it's that simple. And so it's exciting to see and hear about the work that you're doing. But you did reference, you know, the fact that there are a lot of inequities already that exist. And this pandemic really has heightened the awareness of some of those inequities, you know, the digital divide, food security, equitable school environments. You know, Danielle, would you mind kind of defining for us what equity is all about? And then maybe we can elaborate a little bit more about, you know, the shift and the things that parents can do to really ensure their kids are moving forward.
Yeah, and I'd also like to add a contrast too, because I know a lot of times we use the term equality and equity interchangeably. And so I want to make sure we make that distinction today because their meanings are very different. So when you think about processes, equality really means that everyone is treated the exact same way, regardless of need or individual differences. So this really assumes that everyone would benefit equally from an even distribution of resources. Equity, in contrast, really is a process, or using a process that takes into account specific needs, disparities, structural barriers, systemic issues, takes those things into account to ensure that everyone involved has access to equal results and benefits. So that's a way of looking at it. And I like to use an analogy. Equality is me giving everyone a pair of shoes, but equity is giving everyone a pair of shoes that fits them. So thinking about it in those terms kind of makes it easier to make that distinction.
Travis, you know, are you able to elaborate a little bit more on that? Because I think you alluded to some of the work that you're looking to do within your school environment. You know, all of that's around, you know, building an environment that's, you know, equitable for all kids and being sure that they have on the right shoes for them as an individual in their learning space.
Yeah. Well, you know, and that's you know, you talk about school transformation and what that looks like. And the only way it happens is through that collaborative piece. And so now that this is kind of I'll be starting my 4th year next year. And so, you know, you have to spend those couple of years to get to know your building. And then you can start to truly begin the work of looking at your behavioral practices, your instructional practices, and then ways that you are involving the community to now look at school transformation. And so again, that is where we are now. So I'm actually in the starting stages of really beginning some of that work of what, and how the children are doing more on the community level.
Mhm.
But then how can I as a school be involved in that network?
Yeah.
And one of the things that the EVSC is beginning this discussion, and I'm not saying beginning, but we are revisiting what that looks like from a district response as well. We just had a professional development today that talked about equity, and the article is talked about the groundwater. And so the metaphor was that if you have fish in a lake and one fish is dying, okay, it could be the fish, but if you have multiple lakes, multiple fish dying, then we might have to look underneath the lake, underneath the groundwater, the very foundational root of all of that. And so, that's a lot to tackle. and that's a lot to try to navigate your mind through. But so how I tackle it is just one, as a principal, as the principal of a school, is modeling what I want to see and modeling my values and beliefs daily. So that's kind of how I'm starting with that. You know what I mean? I know that's maybe a simple answer to a bigger question, but it's first me being the model of what it means to treat kids, to treat my community, parents, in a way that you can say, hey, that school is trying their best to provide the best for their kids and family members.
Are there some resources out there that parents could to look into as we think about, ensuring their kids are really working towards equitable outcomes? I mean, what are there things out there that would be relevant?
Yeah, and and again, I'm just keeping it real simple from the school standpoint. From the school's point of view, we just have to have a system of communication between the teacher and the parent and all the other stakeholders that are involved in that child's life, because that's where the rubber meets the road right there. And so that's where we got to really begin. We started some of that work last school year, the start of my third year, where over the summer, instead of having the traditional parent-teacher conference, what we did was we brought parents in, and students and parents did some reading and math activities together. And they did that together. And then after they did that activity together, then they went in and talked to their teacher. And then the parent then could see exactly, hey, this is some of my children's strengths and weaknesses. And we were able to start the conversation with their strengths and weaknesses, And so again, that just increased the parent-teacher communication. It showed the parents where the kids were academically in that moment, and then we were able to have a more robust conversation around that work. So on my end, it starts there. It just starts with getting that intact and getting that strong. And then all the other resources that are in the community will just, make sure that is even stronger. Absolutely. Because without that, you really have nothing.
Absolutely. Danielle or Joy, you have anything additional to add there?
I would just say, in terms of some different resources in the community, we're actually I think we're going to talk about it in a little bit, but the youth town hall that's coming up. And after the youth town hall, we're hoping to start a series on the 5th Saturday on 98.5. Where the youth are actually going to be leading conversations and identifying things that are important to them. And then really connecting some community leaders to be the geniuses and do what they do well and best and be, resources, but allowing the children to identify those things that they're pulling out as this is really critical for me. And really hosting those conversations that, hopefully it's more than a conversation, right? It's the start to action but part of action is really getting people connected to the right places, because there's so many people trying to do great things in our community, but at least I see my role as making those connections. Like, oh, here's the need, here's who's doing that in our community. And so that communication, I guess, would be, my answer is that communication is key, right? Whether it's on the radio at the school level, or even one thing I was going to say earlier is just how we talk to our own children, right? And how we listen, and not just, and I have to tell myself this as a parent too, I'm not just talking at you. I'm not always teaching you. Sometimes I need to be the learner. Sometimes I need to be a better listener, and I need to really hear better. Hear what you're trying to tell me, and setting up for that. And just a real, simple thing that we've been reminded of in this quarantine year that we've been living through is tucking your kids in at night, and making sure that bedtime process, even I would add for teenagers, because we have a just now teenager, just taking that time, because there's something really important about that bedtime space where their truth, at least in our family, the truth comes out, and they reveal sort of what's on their heart, and really, remembering and taking that their truth seriously, and being attentive to those things and following up. But I mean, we're all busy and we're all doing the most, but making sure to really keep that sacred 10-15 minutes to listen better to our kids, because they need to be heard, and they need us to respond, but we can't respond until we hear them better.
Absolutely.
And Stephanie, I'll add too, because when I was talking about just communication and being a leader that shows those values, so that's very general. So I'll be specific about an example of what a principal can do to do that work. So when I first got here, one of the things that I try to do is we just ensure that students feel safe in my building, and that my goal is to keep them in school. We don't want to suspend. We don't want to, if I can deal with it at school, I try to do that versus suspending them, because we know suspensions directly correlate to that school to prison pipeline, and just it really damages, So with that being said, when I got here, I put some different practices in place. And as a result, our suspension rate reduced by 80%.
Awesome.
From the previous year. So that is just a data piece, because I know people love data. So that's just a data piece of what, again, a school leader or teachers and school leaders and teachers can do, because that was also an effort for my teachers as well. They came together and said, okay, how can we keep our students in class? We can get some supports to help, but we really want to keep them in our building so that they can learn at the maximum level. So that's an example of what, at the school level, what we can do.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's good. Danielle, you have anything additional to add?
No, I don't have anything to add.
Okay, good. No problem. I really appreciate the conversation today. And just one final question, kind of hopes to kind of summarize some of the things you've already shared. But, kind of define for me what you feel like the characteristics are of a good village. I've heard communication, that parent connection. I've heard, honestly, organizations working together. What else would you define a good village?
We, as a family, we have, really been thoughtful, because we've lived in multiple places and had to truly kind of name and create and imagine our village, right? And what does this look like? And I think my simple definition is people who show up. That's our village, the people that show up in, and it doesn't have to be in the grandiose ways, right? In fact, that's not the important part of showing up. The showing up is when I have an emergency, or if you're quarantined, someone who brings you a little bit of groceries or something, sends you a text or whatever, it says, actually, this happened today. one of our sons needs a ride home from school, and we have another mama who, sometimes like, oh, I got him, I'll drop him off at home, and those little ways that we show up for each other, whether it be among families or whether it be, the little thing of starting this radio show. It's not everything, but it's something. We're showing up and we're listening to the children. And so, in what ways, I think it's a question that we have to each ask each other or ourselves, is how can I show up today? Right. And it's not in the future. It's not the long range plans, but this is the capacity that I have. This is the energy, the resources, the talent that I have to give. And in this small way, without destroying me, and stressing me out so much that I lose my mind. How can I show up today in the best way that I can, for my family, for myself, for my partner, for my family, and then for my community, and including the children.
And I would add to showing up, I would also add the word, as you were talking, the word investment came to my mind, because as adults, we think about the village, and it's hard to create villages as adults because we're just got some other things going on in our lives, just because, we're busy, been hurt and previously been hurt, or, it's just, so it's hard to navigate some of that village as adults. But we recently have met a couple, not recently, it's been almost a year and a half now. And we just met through connection with Joy. And I'll tell you, we've been intentional with this couple. This couple has been intentional with us. We calendar out, hey, we're going to see each other in 2 weeks on Sunday, and we go to each other's house. And so it takes an investment. So a year and a half ago, it was the beginnings of something, but throughout a year and a half, they are now truly a part of our village. So it can't happen overnight, although we would like for it to happen overnight because it's just easier and quicker, I guess. But man, to have now that investment of time that we put in with them, we're seeing and reaping the benefits of their family's village. And it's been awesome. So I think investment also I would include in that.
Yeah, that's good. Danielle, you have any closing comments on that?
Yeah, I would just add, like I said before, my children see who's in the crowd showing up for them, who's cheering them on. And I also have to recognize as a parent that I can't be everything to my children. And so that intentionality on seeking out people who would best connect to them in certain manners that they might need that I can't provide. I think a lot of times we want to be everything for our children, but we also need to be honest with ourselves and also approach our relationships with our children with vulnerability. And letting them know it's okay to be vulnerable, it's okay to be open and honest and transparent so that you can build relationships, which is taught at a young age. And so when I think about my village, again, it's a lot of people in my family, but also my friendship circles and also in our church as well.
Excellent. And that's funny. Just the other day at dinner with my son, and he's a teenager, and our communication really has been enhanced during this last year during the pandemic. But funny, he was talking about athletes and being, talking about I guess they played 3 or 4 sports, and I was like, well, your mom, I played 4 sports when I was in high school, and so it just stunned him to really think about his mom in that way, because he doesn't, he naturally doesn't see me in that light now. But to share those experiences, I think are really, really, really important. And really just to kind of in summation of our discussion today, you said it, show who's showing up, but then who's also investing. I think that's so important because the reality is when we all work together to help children grow, thrive, and survive, we're all better for it. And so CMO as an organization is proud to partner with the community's parents to help prepare children for the future. Joy, Travis, and Danielle, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a great discussion. And parents, please feel free to add your questions if you have those. We do have one question that we received previously, and it's about the upcoming virtual youth town hall. Dr. Howell, would you mind sharing a little bit about that event?
Yeah, so one of the things that we identified you know, in talking to families and things was about both parent involvement, but also a need for the youth, right, to speak for themselves and the community investment piece. And so we've organized a youth-led town hall. Trinisha Brooks has been really integral into that, and several different community organizations. So the youth are going to be gathering at EVPL, but the rest of the event will be held virtually, so you can link into that. I'm going to say this a couple times. We have a website. It's and how are the children Evansville, or sorry, and how are the children EVV, like the airport.org. And so there's a youth town hall page, and that's how you'll link on to the virtual event. It'll be aired on Facebook, our Facebook page, and How Are the Children Evansville Facebook page, as well as I believe that NAACP will also be hosting that virtual conversation. The town hall is specifically around stereotypes about mental health. And so the youth are bringing the thunder in terms of really, and they're, I think, ages 13 to 18. So we're going to be hearing from our teens about what's going on with them personally, but then also their peer groups, because, you know, I think nobody is unaware of all of the dangers that are facing our children are facing these days with the technology age, but then also adding quarantine life on top of it. And it's a road that truly none of us have traveled. We were all teenagers, you know, but we weren't teenagers living through a pandemic. And so this is unique, and so it's really pushing us to, at least I'm positioning myself, and I hope that other adults will too, who have expertise, and we're the professionals, but again, being a learner from these youth and saying, let me hear you and hear you well, and then we'll figure out how we can rally and show up. But let me hear what's on your heart. Let me hear what's on your mind. And so really, again, hearing those mental health threats and how they're coping and what does help and those kind of things. So that's what we'll be hearing. And again, that the website is and how are the children EVV.org. So I'll provide the website as well.
And we will post that flyer as well as part of this segment. But thank you so much for sharing that.
And I should say too, I'm sorry to cut you off, but I don't think I said it'll be March 4th at 5:30. So.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you again for joining us today for Proud Parents. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.